Hello everybody, in this video lecture we will talk about bones and skeletal tissue. So this is chapter 6, part 1. So bones of the skeleton. Bones of the skeleton can be divided into two main groups based on their location. We have axial skeleton shown here in brown color, and it will include skull, vertebral column, and thoracic or rib cage. And rib cage includes ribs and sternum. And appendicular skeleton, shown here in yellow color. An appendicular skeleton includes bones of both upper and lower limbs and bones of the shoulder and hips. And bones of the shoulders, we call it pectoral girdle, and hip bones we call pelvic girdles. So we can classify bones based on their shape. Long bones are longer than they are wide. Short bones, they cube-shaped bones. You will find them in wrist and ankle. Sesamoid bones are pretty rare. One example would be patella, and those bones are within tendons. Flat bones are thin, flat, slightly curved, and irregular bones, complicated shapes. On this diagram, you can see example of a long bones, like humerus, example of flat bone, like sternum. Irregular bone example given here is vertebra, and short bone, it's a talus, the bone of the ankle. So pretty much it's not that hard to classify bones just based on their appearance. The problem might be just a couple bones. Let's say a rib. A rib look like a long for me, right? But rib is a flat bone. So that's something that you might look and the shape doesn't give you precise answer what kind of bone is that. So just remember ribs are flat bones. And clavicle, right? And here's the clavicle right here. Clavicle considered to be a long bone. Now, the long bones over here. So all long bones are vertical. Let's say this is humerus, right? Radius, ulna, femur, tibia, fibula. And you see how they all vertical. So clavicle is the only bone that is horizontal in your body. If you look at the skull, you can see frontal bone, parietal bones, occipital bones. Those are flat bones, right? So also the hip bones considered to be flat bones, right? So ribs are flat bones, clavicle is long bones, and here you can see more examples of different types of bones. Functions of bones: support for the body and soft organs, protection for your brain, spinal cord, vital organs, movement, because they act as levers for muscle action. Also, function of bone is storage. Bones store minerals, mostly calcium and phosphorus, and some growth factors. Another function of bones is blood cell formation. This process is called hematopoiesis, and it happens in marrow cavities, specifically in a red bone marrow cavity. And triglyceride or energy storage, also in bone cavities, but this time we store fat in a yellow marrow cavities. Bone markings, we have bulges, depressions, holes, and all these parts of a bone serve as site of attachment for muscles, ligaments, and tendons. Also on the surface of the joints or conduit for blood vessels and nerves. Bones have lots of different markings, and we need to know them to understand where muscle, ligament, tendons are attached. Also, we need to understand what blood vessels, what nerves passing through, maybe some holes in the bone. But we will talk more about bone markings in our lab. So over here, it's just trying to introduce you to major bone markings and telling you that they do have meaning in their names. Like tuberosity is a large rounded projection. Crest is a narrow ridge. Trochanter is a very large, blunt, irregular shaped process. Tubercle is a small rounded projection. Epicondyle, it's a raised area of the bone and it's above a condyle. Spine is a sharp, slender projection. Process is any body prominence. I don't think it's helpful just to try to memorize the description and name. When we cover these bones, and I will show you different bones, and I will show you these bone markings, and after that, I think this information will make more sense for you. So please just go ahead and read it, right? And we will address back to this information during our lab. So here's more markings over here. And more markings, depressions, and opening on this slide. Bone texture. So we can divide bone based on the texture into compact bone, and the name itself tells you it's a dense layer, and it's outer layer of a bone, and spongy bone or cancellous bone. And the name itself tells you it probably has something similar to a sponge, and it does. So it's a honeycomb or trabecula. So on this pictures here, you can see that's a spongy bone or trabecula bone or cancellous bone. And this is the compact bone shown here on the right. And you see that compact bone covers the surface of a bone, and spongy you can find inside. If you look at a typical long bone, you can divide it into several parts. So we have diaphysis, and diaphysis is the shaft. Just a second. So here's diaphysis. And we have two epiphyses. So epiphysis, we have proximal and distant epiphysis of a long bone. So diaphysis is a shaft, compact bone color, surrounds medullary or marrow cavity. And medullary cavity in adults contain yellow marrow, that pretty much fat, and this is where we store triglyceride to use it later as an energy source. Also, there is articular cartilage at the end of epiphysis, and both proximal and distal. And articular cartilage means this is where the joint is formed, because articulation means movement, and we have movement at joints. Epiphyses are expanded ends. They have spongy bone interior, epiphyseal line, and you can find epiphyseal line right here. So here's the name, epiphyseal line, and here's the line itself, right? And epiphyseal line is a remnant of growth plate. We will find it in adult bones, and the presence of epiphyseal line will tell us that this bone is not growing in length anymore. There is articular cartilage on proximal and distal epiphyses, and this is hyaline cartilage, and it's found on the surface of joints. Also, if you look here to your right, you can see that we have compact bone, right, on the surface, and spongy bone in the middle. And inside the spongy bone, you see these structures, they call trabeculae. Membranes of bone. Bone is covered by periosteum. So here you can see periosteum on the outer surface of a bone, and inside, right here, cavities and trabecula, they will be covered by endosteum. So periosteum has these perforating fibers that attach periosteum to bony tissue. Periosteum has two layers, outer fibrous layer and inner osteogenic layer. Inside the inner layer, we can find osteoblasts that are bone-forming cells, osteoclast, bone-destroying cells, and osteogenic cells or stem cells. They can differentiate into osteoblast. We also will find nerve fibers, nutrient blood vessels, lymphatic vessels enter the bone via nutrient foramina. And periosteum is secured to underlying bone by Sharpey's fibers or perforating fibers. And osteum is delicate membrane on internal surface of bone, and it also contains osteoblast, osteoclast, and some stem cells, osteoprogenitor cells. So on this diagram, you can see the periosteum, compact bone, and fibrous layer of the periosteum that is outer, and cellular layer of periosteum that is inner layer. And in this inner layer, this is where you will find osteoblast, osteoclast, and osteoprogenitor or stem cells. Then in the compact bone, we have osteocytes. We also have blood vessels, we have nerves. And this endosteum, that is a delicate membrane covering cavities, bone cavities, and trabeculae. And here also you can see osteoclast. Those are pretty large cells, multinucleated. Those dots are here are nuclei. We also have osteogenic cells. Right, that's our stem cells, and osteoblast. So what we discussed in our previous slide was the structure of a typical long bone. This slide telling you about structure of short, irregular, and flat bones. Similar or the same as the long bones, they have periosteum that cover short, irregular, and flat bones on the outside, endosteum that covers spongy bone within. Spongy bone in flat bones is called diploe, and bone marrow is located between the trabeculae. On this picture, you can see a flat bone, and this is parietal bone. So we have compact bone outside. We have spongy bone that have this trabeculae inside, and specifically it's called diploe for the flat bones. Location of hematopoietic tissue. And hematopoietic tissue is found in red bone marrow. So red bone marrow in adults are found in the trabecular cavities of the heads of the femur and humerus. And head of femur and humerus is located in a proximal epiphysis. Also, red bone marrow in adults found in the trabecular cavities of the diploe of flat bones. So spongy bones in flat bones, this is where we will find red bone marrow, and heads of femur and humerus when we're talking about adults. In newborn infants, you would find red bone marrow in medullary cavities of all bones and all spaces in spongy bone. Skeletal cartilages. I want to remind you that skeletal system consists of bones, skeletal cartilages, and ligaments, right? So skeletal cartilages are also part of the skeletal system. Cartilage is connective tissue, same as bone. The difference is cartilage is avascular. It does not contain any blood vessels or nerves. So this is very rare because connective tissue is really very vascular. Cartilage has also covering that we call perichondrium, and its dense connective tissue girdle, and pericardium shown over here. This is the structure that contains blood vessel for nutrient delivery to cartilage. So we do have blood vessels and nerves and perichondrium, and no blood vessels, no nerves inside the cartilage itself. So there is three major types of cartilage: hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibra cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is most abundant type, provides support, flexibility, resilience. Elastic cartilage, similar to hyaline cartilage, but contains more of elastic fibers, when hyaline cartilage contains collagen fibers. Fibra cartilage contains lots of collagen and have a great tensile strength. So on this diagram we can see the location of a cartilage, and hyaline cartilage shown here in blue, elastic in green, and fibra cartilage in red. So you can see that hyaline cartilage is the most abundant. You will find it into articular area, so in the joints, so all joints here, right? Everywhere we have synovial joints that I show you, that's a hyaline cartilage. Also, you will find hyaline cartilage in a rib cage here, so it's costal cartilage. Also nose. On this picture to your right, you can see the thyroid cartilage, cricoid cartilage, trachea, and bronchi. They all have lots of hyaline cartilage. Elastic cartilage pretty much limited to only two locations, and it will be your external ear or pinna, right? External ear. And look at your right, that's epiglottis. That's elastic cartilage. And fibrocartilage, you would find it into intervertebral disc, right? So let me get the red one. So here in between the vertebra, you will have intervertebral disc. So part of it is made of fibrocartilage. Also, you would find it in this area. This is called pubic symphysis. And pubic symphysis is a cartilage that connects two hip bones anteriorly, and also in meniscus in a knee joint. So as you see, distribution of elastic and fibrocartilages are limited, and the most abundant is a hyaline cartilage. Growth of cartilage. So cartilage can grow, and cartilaginous structure can increase in the length, become longer and wider as well. So we have two types of cartilage growth: appositional and interstitial. Well, the word itself should give you a clue. Interstitial, especially, this will be the growth inside, right, from inside. So chondrocytes divide and secrete new matrix in expanding cartilage from within. So if you look at this picture here, you can see that some chondrocytes are located on the surface, right? So here's our surface of the cartilage, right? And some chondrocytes located within. And if cartilage located within, this maybe some epiphyseal plate over here, right? So the cartilage within, chondrocytes can divide. So here you can see the process of division because we see two nuclei. So chondrocytes divide within the matrix, start secreting matrix around them, and expand cartilage. Or, so that will be interstitial growth. So cartilage grows from inside. And appositional growth, this is a growth on the surface, right? So here cells divide, right, as well, and they secrete matrix on the external surface of existing cartilage. So here's another picture that show you appositional growth of the cartilage. So we grow from the surface, right? And the youngest layer will be the most superficial layer. And interstitial growth, when cartilage grows from within, so the younger will be pretty much like inner layer. Now we're gonna look at microscopic anatomy of bone, and we start with cells. So we would find osteogenic cells or stem cells, and those are cells in periosteum and endosteum that give rise to osteoblasts. So these cells can differentiate into osteoblasts. Osteoblasts are matrix synthesizing cells responsible for bone growth. Osteocyte is a mature bone cell that maintains the bone matrix, and osteoclast is bone resorbing cells. Now on your right, you can see the microscopic structure of a compact bone, and structural unit of a compact bone is osteon. So this structure over here is osteon. And osteon has these rings of matrix, right? So here's one ring, and I get a yellow one. Here's another one, right? So this circular structure here, those are lamellae. And lamellae are weight-bearing column-like matrix tubes. So of course, if you're looking from surface, you just see this circular structure. But if you pull out the osteon, you will see that it's actually a tube. So we have bigger tubes and smaller tubes inside. Each osteon has this opening here. It's called central canal, and central canal contains blood vessels and nerves. On this diagram, you can see lamellae. Right, so here we have concentric lamellae. I just want to remind you that we have different type of lamellae. We have circumferential lamellae, we have concentric lamellae, we even have interstitial lamellae. The ones that make this osteon are called concentric lamellae, and it's just the matrix and a specific arrangement of the matrix. So those are concentric lamellae. These blue lines represent collagen, and you can see that collagen fibers run in different directions, and because of this, that make your bone very strong. Inside the osteon, we have central canal that contains arteries with capillaries, vein, and nerve fibers. As we discussed in the previous slide, inside osteon, we have central canal. So central canal runs vertically inside a compact bone, but we also have perforating canals located at right angles to the central canal. And what they do, they connect blood vessels and nerves of the periosteum and central canal. We have lacunae, that are small cavities that contains osteocytes, and canaliculi, hair-like canals that connect lacunae to each other and the central canal. So on this diagram, you can see osteon, that is a structural unit of a compact bone with the central canal inside, right? And here we have blood vessels. Only arteries are shown here, but also veins and nerves are present. So that's a central canal, and here perforating canal. So they are at right angles to central canal, and they connect the blood vessels of the periosteum and blood vessels of the central canal. So here we have connection through perforating canals. Also, these cells here with little legs that are called pseudopods, those are osteocytes, and osteocytes are located inside lacunae, like a little pocket that has a fluid, and then canaliculi connects lacunae to each other and to the central canal. So that's compact bone here, and here's spongy bone. On this diagram, you can see osteocytes better. So here's osteocyte, another osteocyte. So osteocytes are used to be osteoblasts, but when osteoblasts secrete matrix around them, very soon they get trapped inside this matrix and they became osteocytes. And this hair-like canals, those are canaliculi. And canaliculi connects lacunae together, and they connect them with the central canal as well. And this structure here, right, so all the structure, this is our concentric lamella, right, so that's concentric lamella. So it's like a tube, right, so here we have one tube, and then we have smaller tubes inside. So what we discussed previously was the anatomy of compact bone. If you look at the spongy bones, they have trabeculae. and trabeculae align along lines of stress. They do not have osteons, and they contain irregularly arranged lamellae, osteocytes, and canaliculi. So that's our spongy bone, and here you can see our trabeculae. And if you look inside the trabecula, you still see the lamellae, right? But these lamellae are not concentric. So let me do this. So here's the lamella, right? And maybe I'll take a red one. Here's another lamella. So you can see they're not concentric, they are irregularly arranged. We do have osteocytes, right? We do have canaliculi, but no central canal, and we don't see this osteon. Chemical composition of bone. Chemical composition of bone can be divided into two parts, organic and inorganic. So on this slide, we will talk about organic part of a bone. Organic part will include all those cells that we discussed previously: osteogenic cells, stem cells, osteoblasts, cells that secrete bony matrix, osteocytes, maintain bone matrix, and osteoblast resorb bone matrix. So all the cells and organic part of the matrix. Bone is connective tissue, and remember that connective tissue is made of cells and extracellular matrix. So those are cells of a bone, and then the matrix itself, it has organic part and inorganic part. So organic part is called osteoid. So osteoid is organic part of a bony matrix, and it's secreted by osteoblast. And matrix, remember that matrix is made of ground substance and fibers. So here's our ground substance, including proteoglycans and glycoproteins. Both of these molecules are organic molecules made of protein and sugar attached to it, and collagen fibers. And collagen fibers provide tensile strength and flexibility to a bone. And inorganic part of a bone will include mineral salts. So mineral salts are mainly calcium and phosphate crystals, and we call it hydroxyapatite. So hydroxyapatites are mineral salts that make 65% of bone by mass, and mainly calcium phosphate crystals. And they're responsible for hardness and resistance to compression. So if you look at this diagram, it tells you that matrix of a bone, because it has both collagen and mineral compounds, this make our bones strong enough and at the same time not fragile. So collagen and mineral components responsible for major functional characteristic of a bone. Without minerals, the bones would be too flexible, and without collagen, bones would be too fragile. So it's just the perfect combination of organic and inorganic substances in the bone matrix that allow our bone to carry all its functional to carry on all its functions, right? Bone development. The bone development is called ossification. So ossification is the bone development or osteogenesis. Osteogenesis is a bone tissue formation. We have three major stages of bone formation. We have a bone formation that begins in the second month of development. Then we have postnatal bone growth until early adulthood and bone remodeling, and this is lifelong. So the bones are formed during embryonic development, then bone growth, continue growth until early adulthood, and we remodel our bones through our whole life. So during embryonic development of the bones can be formed by two types of ossification: intramembranous ossification and endochondral ossification. So what does it mean, intramembranous? That means that bone will form from membrane, from fibrous membrane. So we begin with the fibrous membrane, and then this membrane will ossify. What bones develops by intramembranous ossification? All bones of the cranium, so cranial bones, and clavicles. Clavicle is actually the only bone below your skull that develops by intramembranous ossification. The rest of the bones below the skull, right, developed by endochondral ossification. So endochondral ossification starts with the cartilage, with hyaline cartilage model, and bone is formed by replacing hyaline cartilage and form most of the rest of the skeleton. Now we can briefly look at intramembranous ossification. Intramembranous ossification starts with the connective tissue membrane. So this part over here, shown in blue, this is the membrane. Inside this membrane you will find mesenchymal cells, and right somewhere in the middle of the membrane, mesenchymal cells will cluster together and differentiate into osteoblast. So the first step of intramembranous ossification will end up in a formation of ossification center. Osteoblast, those cells over here, they start secreting osteoid. And I'm just reminding you that osteoid is the organic part of the matrix. So osteoblasts begin to secrete osteoid, which is calcified within a few days. Now we have some osteoblasts that are trapped now inside this calcified matrix, and they become osteocytes. So step number 2, bony matrix, osteoid is secreted within the fibrous membrane and calcifies. Step number 3, formation of woven bone and periosteum. Some accumulating osteoid is laid down between embryonic blood vessels in a random manner. The result is network, instead of lamellae, of trabecula called woven bone. Vascularized mesenchyme condenses on the external surface of the woven bone and become periosteum. So if you look over here, so osteoblast continues secreting the matrix. So here's our matrix, and it's depositing around the blood vessels. So how it is deposited is very random. Result is formation of this woven bone. Now on external surface, so here's our external surface, we still have this membrane, and mesenchymal cells, shown here as blue cells, right? They condense and form periosteum. So periosteum is the membrane that cover the bone. Step number 4. Lamellar bone replaces woven bone just deep to the periosteum, and red marrow appears. So on this diagram, you can see in the middle, we have spongy bone, right? But this osteoblast, now on the surface, they start secreting matrix in a different manner. They start secreting lamellar bone, right? So that will be our compact bone. So trabecular, just deep to periosteum, and here's our periosteum. So that we have trabecula in this area. So trabecula in this area, deep to periosteum, are replaced with mature lamellar bone, forming compact bone plates. And we end up with compact bone on the surface and spongy bone inside. And the vascular tissue inside the spongy bone became red bone marrow. So this vascular tissue, right over here, it became red bone marrow. Endochondral ossification. Endochondral ossification also happened during embryonic development, and it uses hyaline cartilage model. So bone will be formed from hyaline cartilage, and it requires breakdown of hyaline cartilage prior to ossification. So pretty much cartilage osteocytes will die, and osteoblast will develop a bone. So on this diagram, you can see all 5 stages of endochondral ossification. So we will look at each one and then get back to this diagram. So here you can see week 9 of embryonic development, and what's gonna happen first, we have the model. So here you have hyaline cartilage model of the bones already. Now remember that we have a perichondrium here, right? So we have this membrane that is called perichondrium. And inside this membrane, we have mesenchymal cells. So this mesenchymal cells, they differentiate into osteoblast. And when they differentiate into osteoblast, this osteoblast start developing this bony color, right? So the stage number 1, bone color forms around hyaline cartilage model. So we have this bony structure covering the diaphysis of a long bone. Right inside, we see the formation of what is called primary ossification center. So this cartilage, right in the middle of the diaphysis, right, this cartilage became calcified. So chondroblast starts secrete calcium over here. And it start develop this cavity. So not only, so we have this bony color, right? And this makes difficult for nutrients to diffuse in, right? Remember, cartilage is avascular. So when the color is formed, nutrients and oxygen has hard time to diffuse inside. So these chondrocytes inside, not only they calcified and they start dying. So this cartilage inside, those cells are dying because of a low supply of nutrients and oxygen through the diffusion. Right, so here, when cartilage are dying here, we start forming a cavity. Now, around month 3 of embryonic development, the structure called periosteal bud invades the internal cavity. And periosteal bud is the embryonic structure that has, right, so here's our bud, it has blood vessels, but it also gonna bring inside the model special cells, osteoblast. So we have blood supply with oxygen and nutrients. We have also supply of osteoblast cells. And those osteoblast cells start depositing this spongy bone inside this primary ossification center. So spongy bone formation inside primary ossification center. Stage number 3 happens around the birth, and diaphysis elongates. Medullary cavity forms as ossification continues, and we can see appearance of secondary ossification center now in epiphysis of the bone. Right, so here the secondary ossification center is formed. So stage number 5, from childhood to adolescence, epiphysis now ossified. So remember, we form secondary ossification center over here. So cartilage dies and bone is formed. So bone is replacing cartilage. So epiphysis ossify, and when process is completed, hyaline cartilage remains only in this articular cartilage and epiphyseal plate. And this is where the cartilage will continue dividing and bone can grow longer. So here's all our 5 stages together. We start with formation of bony collar, then formation of primary ossification center in the middle, and we're gonna start with calcification first and then ossification. So calcification is secretion of the calcium, ossification is secretion of the bony matrix. Right, then we have secondary ossification center that appears in epiphysis. Then epiphysis ossifies, and the cartilage only remain as articular cartilage here and epiphyseal plate. And this is our last slide, when you can see if something goes wrong with ossification, we can have problems. So over here, it shows you the genetic condition called Achondroplastic Dwarfism. And this is where during embryonic development the problem happens with endochondral ossification. So if there is a problem with endochondral ossification, it can result in a achondroplastic dwarfism. So this is the Peter Dinklage. I don't know if I pronounce his name right or wrong, but that's the guy that has this condition. And if something goes wrong with intramembranous ossification, it can result in cleidocranial dysplasia. And this is a problem with ossification of flat bones. So here the major will be actually the low jaw and problem with the clavicles. Sometimes clavicles are not fully developed or clavicles are completely missing. And this is another actor from Stranger Things. Okay, so that's it for the first part of this chapter, and I hope it was helpful.